Back. Okay, here we go. Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's Eros talk. We're really glad you're here with us today. My name is Leah, and I am your host today. Welcome to those of you on Zoom and then also on social media, from YouTube to Facebook to Instagram. We've been getting over 300 people that tune in from different places. So it's definitely very exciting to see you wherever you're at, even though I can't see you. Welcome to the call. The Eros platform is a global community dedicated to exploring the power of Eros as a path to deeper connection, creativity, and personal growth. Today's speaker is Maya. Maya Gilbert is a 16-year orgasmic meditation practitioner. She is also the creative director of basically everything that we do. So for those of you who follow our Instagram, whether it's the Eros platform or the One Taste one, Maya is the creative eye that really gives you the blend of art and Eros and having everything feel art feel as much as sensational as you would in an OM. And so Maya has also done a few of the AI art series on the platform. If you haven't had a chance to join Maya when she was doing those, you can definitely look on the platform and find her videos there. And then Maya is somebody who I would call a heart whisperer. She's able to speak to that tender part of you that may have some roughness around the edges because you're protecting something tender. And Maya definitely knows how to get in there by just her being and who she is. And so I'm very happy to have Maya as a friend, as a co-creator. And today we're going to be hearing from Maya and her story. So I'll hand it over to you, Maya.
Hello, thank you very much. I am thrilled to be doing our Eros talk today. The topic that I wanted to talk about today is based on this idea from some Instagram posts that we've been doing lately. There was a post yesterday on Nicole Dedon's Facebook page, and it said, "She who is turned on cannot be controlled." And there's this cool graphic that I made, and it was posted, and then there was a discussion that came up from it. And I thought that would be a really interesting way to talk through today, um, because some people were saying, I'll kind of ad lib what their comments were. So basically, they said, "How does this work?" So the quote is, "She who is turned on cannot be controlled." And then the questions that arose from that were basically, "But I've been turned on before and made bad decisions and maybe was controlled because I was turned on." And so I wanted to kind of go into that and go into the specifics of what that means and what does it mean that one is uncontrollable when one is turned on. And so I think that the first is kind of like a foundational understanding of what we mean by turn on and what we mean and what are the mechanics of it. So when when one turns on, there is the activation of power within the body. There's the activation of that involuntary and the activation of that life force that moves through us. And this is why we teach Om and why we practice it and why we aim in all of our activity towards that state of vivification of the self and of the being. And that is that power internally being turned on is what gives one the power to express, the power to create. It is creativity itself. And it also is what creates inner resilience, and it's what creates fortification of of this being in this life. And so that is the model of being turned on. And then when one is turned off, it is the turning off of that power valve. And so when you turn off your power valve, when you shut down, when you repress, when you say no to desire, when you um, don't allow for hungers on any level of a hunger to exist within the body, you I think most people understand this intuitively as from some experience in your life. You know that you lose access to a certain first kind of like a basic level of vitality. Then you um, lose kind of access to your intuition, the things that kind of would be sense in a sense way guiding you, the kind of the the lust of life just kind of dims. Things feel maybe simple, maybe even enjoyable, but there's just a kind of low gradeness to life that begins to happen. Within that, the mind that can produce problems and fixate on lack just becomes increasingly strong. And then because you have cut off from this source of inner strength and power, you then don't have an inner compass to go by. You can only go by ideas or external concepts. And so this is the model then that creates a being that is the most controllable. If you are cut off from that power source, you are you have the least connection to that tether and the most ability to just be swayed by whatever force externally would sway you. And so this is why those who seek to have a oppressed society will seek to oppress people's sexuality, because if you can control their sexuality, you can control them. Um, Now, we'll go to another kind of intuitive experience that I think also people have had, which is kind of the root of this question, which was that, but there is this experience that I think a lot of people have had where you are turned on and then things are a little wild and you might do things you wouldn't normally otherwise wouldn't do, or you might say things, or you might just express in these ways that feel out of control and and it's true, but there's a difference between having the spigot turned on and that experience happening, and having the spigot turned off, and being able to be swayed. And so I wanted to kind of go into this to talk about this, and if people have questions, that we can kind of dig into this a little bit more. So when you are the experience of turning on is can be tremendously destabilizing. You're opening yourself to let power move through you that doesn't have a predictability to it, and it goes on its own um, sensing, and it's also, we as culturally almost everybody has suppressed it so much. So initially when you open it, especially, it's going to be like when you open a old pipe and it runs rusty before it runs clear. And so um, there's all of these things that you're going to have to contend with as you begin to open that up. Um, Ultimately, with the promise that that being open and that power coming through you is what will have your deepest sense of satisfaction, expression, gratification in life. And it is, while people think of opening to Eros as something that might be hedonistic or simply pleasure seeking, when you actually get down into this kind of level of it, you can see it's a very rigorous and very challenging path of practice. And so within that, it's like you're learning to ride a wild bull and a stallion. You're learning to, how do you take this tremendous force and actually steer it? How do you walk alongside it? How are you able to guide it into creativity, when it wants to continuously go into something, maybe that's obsession. How do you work with the force? How do you love the force enough? How do you aim it? And so that then becomes a life's work. That then becomes the thing that we're practicing is aiming for turn on, aiming for desire, aiming for these things to be enlivened within us, and then working with how do you refine, how do you steer, how do you be intimate with that experience. And um, and so that was I thought it was such a great discussion that began on from this post into the comment section. So I wanted to really kind of bring it to this forum so we can really, because I think a lot of people are afraid of turning on because they see parts of themselves that they don't otherwise see, No, I was turned on. I went with that. I like kissed that man. And I normally wouldn't, but it was because I was under the influence of turn on, and it's like, yeah, when you turn on, your senses might take you outside of the confines of what your sense of self has been developed as. And that's kind of the point, I think. Then in other ways, people know that they're always trying to seek, to get a little bit outside of their comfort zone. They're always trying to seek these different things. And uh, but then we have no context for talking about it in this particular arena of arousal and eros and sexuality. I found a piece of writing of Nicole's that I thought also illustrated this point that I thought would be interesting to read. We are facing a global suffocation by killing the erotic impulse in free thinkers who rely on it to express it the most in the name of safety. We are slowly creating a world devoid of genuine power, life, and equality. Furthermore, instincts do not disappear. They are merely driven underground, out of sight, until they inevitably become a backlash. The price we are unwilling to pay now is uncomfortable ownership of power and responsibility. We will pay later with interest. Society is now drawing ragged breaths from a respirator. And so I think that there's this constant thing that I think many of us on the front lines of Eros are really seeing in the culture and in all these myriad of ways of this killing the erotic impulse and and cutting it everywhere that we see that people are going a little bit outside the lines. But the cost of that is this cutting off of power. And then, but when you cut off the erotic impulse, this is something you can see over, the whole of centuries as, we've had witch hunts, we've had, mass attempts of killing the erotic impulse and snuffing out, um, that power of women, but it does not ever die. It goes underground and then it rises again. And but whenever you push something underground is where it can become distorted and have, that's where you associate things like the erotic impulse with um, more so with transgression or more so with aggression is because it's been tamped down so much instead of allowed to be expressed freely in its kind of natural creative way that it would express if it were. The final piece of what I wanted to share today is kind of the next step along these lines that of something I just see really interesting happening in culture right now is that I think uh, a big historically the left in politics has been the champion of forwarding erotic expression. And we are reaching a time now where the left is really the party that is becoming the most rule bound and the most controlling of erotic expression. And maybe on like the PR surface level, they still are endorsing erotic expression, like, queer identity and, non-binariness, just all of these different things that in name are to do with something erotic. But in terms of the actual erotic quality, um, the left as a whole is becoming so deconstructivist and so bound up in rules and so bound up in the regulation of everybody and speech and action and um, that and then you have these massive explosions like Sydney Sweeney's jeans campaign that I think was so clearly really just trying to talk about how she's got hot tits and she's a hot babe, and it was just like playing up off of that. And the extent, the extreme extent to which the left raged against it and said that it was, race baiting and all of these things. It just is one of those things that you see something culturally happen, and when you look at the effect of that, and when I saw that, to me, it's just like that is lack of power. That is that is a whole segment of culture cut off from power, that it would have that dry and aggressive of a response, that would lack humor, that would lack um, an ability to play or take something, even if it was something offensive, to take an offensive thing and then play back. Those are symbols of access to power and having erotic access. Um, and that kind of finger waving is a sign of lacking access to that power and lacking access to that erotic impulse. And so, it's just been this very interesting moment in time where I have this hypothesis that the right and conservative women are actually going to be the ones that pick up the mantle of sexuality, because they are more willing and more accepting of a kind of volatility, of a kind of wildness that is the actual experience of erotic impulse. And it seems, so counterintuitive because of all of the slogans and everything that we know that is represented in the right. But I think that because there's such a strong reaction happening in the left, and the left is not picking up the cue to actually take its own ownership, and it keeps relinquishing ownership, in fact, further and further, that it's in kind of a reactionary swing. The right is going to be the party that's going to pick it up and is going to say it is hot to be turned on. It is, to have a certain level of bodily autonomy and a sovereignty over one's sexuality and a sovereignty over one's mind, and the that to say I have the ability to consent, and I am strong, and I am confident in that it's building. That is what is being created in the right because of a lack of representation that in the left. And it's just this very interesting moment in time that I think, we'll see how it goes. I don't have like a particular uh it's not, I don't have like a ball in one court in either direction. It's just kind of what I see happening before us. And I think that would just be so interesting if the tides do turn that way. But but it really does seem like this moment where the left is just not, and especially feminists are just not picking up the cue to take about self-responsibility and the ownership of sexuality in all ways is the way that we will progress into a actual sexual revolution or next frontier of erotic expression and all of these things. And the continued relinquishing of it is what is going to have it be that somebody else is going to have to pick it up, and it might be the right. Um, and then before we go into questions, I'll end with this Camille Paglia quote. She is this feminist who's just rocking, and I really loved this as well on this topic. I am very concerned that what young women are saying through this strident feminist rhetoric is that they feel incapable of conducting independent sex lives. They require adult intrusion and supervision and penalizing of men who go astray. But if feminism means anything, it should be encouraging young women to take control of every aspect of their sex lives, including their own impulses, conflicts, and disappointments. That's what's tragic about all of this. Young women don't seem to realize that in demanding adult inquiry into the adjudication of their sex lives, they're forfeiting their own freedom and agency. And again, that's Camille Paglia. Um, so those are my thoughts and my talk of today. And I wanted to open it up now for any questions or comments or anything that we have that people would like to discuss on this topic.
Thank you so much, Maya. What a good, rich topic indeed. We'll go ahead and start with Russell.
Hi, Maya. Um, it occurred to me that like all forms of contact would now be viewed as trespassing, um, and that you would be afraid of any kind of shift from your homeostatic place. That's the thought.
Yeah, that's a great way to homeostasis is a great way to frame it of turn on being the exiting of homeostatic reality in one way or another. When you're turned on, you leave that and when you look out at a situation, at a culture, at anything, you can look at where is there the most life happening outside of homeostasis, and that being part of the guiding principle to see where there's the most turn on. Thanks, Russell.
Thank you, Russell. Anybody else have a question? You can go ahead and raise your virtual hand and I'll call on you. Or if you're not able to, you can also pop a question in the chat and I will read that out loud too. Okay. Let me just check on social media really quickly. We have a question on social media. Why do you think the left isn't picking up the mantle of sex given how hard they fought for it? And what do you think will be required for the tipping point where that actually does start happening?
I imagine that the reason the left isn't picking up the mantle of sexuality is because the benefit, I mean, one is that it must be too confronting and too challenging a prospect and the benefit of not holding responsibility must seem higher still than picking up responsibility. Like to I always imagine if somebody or some group or something, if they're not doing something yet, there must be a desire stronger than to change yet. And so I think that there's a desire that is still stronger to not pick up their power, to not face the work, the day in and day out work that it would mean to truly own up their sexuality. I think all it would take is really enough dominoes in a culture that would make it like attractive. I think anybody who sees something that's attractive is attracted to it, you know, and so you have enough women who are turned on and saying, I'm turned on. I love men. I love women. I love my erotic appetite. It gives me fortification. I am generous. I can consent. I can also handle if experiences go awry and if it's, you know, because that is life and that is how we learn through these experiences, and that there's more demonstration of that and more examples of how you work with that. I think that that's what it's going to take in order for anybody, whoever it is, to really begin to do this. And there aren't enough voices yet in any part on either side of the parties that really are doing that. Um, and so that was what it would take, is having enough of a sway of people, of women owning it and then making that the hot thing to do. And people seeing the results of it, you know, seeing like, oh, if you own all aspects of your erotic power, you are more radiant and you feel better and you are more generous, and you can kind of tell these things, and then you're like, I want to be like that. And then more and more women begin to work with it and take that up. And I think that would be the first step.
Beautiful. Thank you, Maya. We have Harold. Hi, Harold.
Hi there. Maya, do you feel that men own their own sexuality?
That's a beautiful question. I think that men are given a lot more permission in the culture to have that channel open. You know, we often say like men are kind of inversely, like men are not given as much permission to have an emotional channel open, but they're given more permission to have a sexual channel open. You know, the man who can conquest and who can be a Casanova in the culture is a good thing. The man who shares his feelings in the culture. I mean, now it's a little bit different, but like it still is, there still is like a lot of stigma on that. And so I think that what is missing in many ways from men in our culture is more of a sensitivity and I mean, just the woman factor is really the missing thing. Like, you know, a woman is who can give you feedback on how you are showing up. If a woman has not developed that in herself, she cannot give you that feedback. And so then you are doing your very best that you can. And uh, but it will take the women to be there in the experience, and that you have women who can show up and be that for you. Um, and so I think men have really taken the mantle as far as the mantle can be taken by men. And so now it's just time for women to pick up and take us to the next place.
Sweet. Thank you, Maya. Next, we'll go to Rachel.
Hi, this is such a wonderful talk. I'm really enjoying it. And I just wonder if you could talk a little more about um, what does controlling mean? Like you cannot be controlled, you know, and just kind of like you get yourself turned on and you describe that so well, but then what is this feeling? Because sometimes I'm always like, is this control? Is this not control? Like, and what does it look like? And what does it look like to be free? Because sometimes it's different than what I think. And I just wonder if you could talk about it a little bit more.
Love this question, Rachel. Yeah, and I think that in the way that I read Nicole's quote of when you're turned on, you cannot be controlled. Um, there's a there's an inner sovereignty, I think, of every person, of every human being that that is related to unconditional freedom, you know, that you can have freedom in any condition. And so the conditions can be however they are, and you still internally can be free, irregardless of whatever is happening through external circumstance. And that is the ultimate liberation, and that is the ultimate um, um, almost like human right, or like spiritual right of a being. And um, and that when you lose access to that inner freedom, when you lose access to our erotic impulse, it has it be that you're just so much more susceptible to all of the different all to everything being externally defined, everything being based off of what other people do, think, act in, and that being how everything about your life and how about your internal experience is judged. And um and so again, I think that there's a lot of different ways to talk about control. Um And so I think it's that's the best that I would say of like how I would say that I think is like the deepest understanding of the ultimate, like not the ultimate liberation, or the ultimate not being controlled, is not being controlled by an external reality versus an internal one.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. And then Leah, you had a question? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. My question is, so if I'm talking to people, if I'm what's the best way to like communicate this to a woman who's like never heard of these concepts? Um, and really like especially like women like to I don't know, this is a generalization. Women like they sometimes they talk about they commiserate or they connect through complaints. And it's sometimes it feels like such a tricky tightrope to switch that to like, where did how did you create, that kind of feeling, and then have them. So what is a really like, do you have any thoughts on how to like start to have women see how they like ask people to put shackles on them so they don't take responsibility and yet they're complaining?
I think that's a great question. I mean, I honestly, I think it's, very dependent on your relationship and how much permission you have with any of these women. But I think ultimately the best thing is you do it for yourself and you make it an attractive path. And you can, because honestly, I think that there's a very circuitous way to go about it, because I think that oftentimes if you tell a woman who's in that kind of situation directly, like, you know, how did you create that? What was your power? I just don't find that personally that ever particularly goes very well in that moment. But I will be like, what do you want to eat tonight? And just begin connecting them to their desire in any sphere that I possibly can. And if you can connect, because the more a woman connects to her desire and the more she connects to her power, the more capacity she has for that particular thought within herself. Um, I think that it's great. I think creating discussions about this, like where you put the call out and people who are interested come together and we all talk about it. And I think that that's a way that is a constructive way to talk about it really directly. I like to write about it. I like to talk about it. I like to create about it. And that's one way of putting it out in a more like laid out way. But when I'm talking with somebody directly, it's hard. It's so ingrained. It's so ingrained to not hold one's power. And it's very hard in that moment when they're particularly in that kind of place to remind them of their power. And so that's there might be ways of going about it that are better, but for me, I just know for myself, I like to just simply direct them to their desire in any way that I can. If I can get them turned on to anything is what I will do.
That's great. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Great talk.
When she's turned on, you can do no wrong. When she's turned off, you can do no right.
It's a great one. Never not true.
Thank you, Leah. Any other questions? Go ahead and raise your hand or put it in the comment section. We do have a comment from Marianne, and then I'll go to Jack. She said, I feel like it's not right or left as much as women, just being able to support women in their turn on wherever they are. After all, both the right and the left are part of the same political bird. Women trusting their inner guidance is more powerful than anything political.
I think it's totally true. And there are also trends. I think that the left and right create memes based on affiliation. So there's memes that are created and memes of the left and memes of the right. And the memes of the left are currently for abdicating power, for, just abandoning one's power. That's the meme of the left. Someone else's fault. And so more and more the meme of the right is I will take my power in response. And I agree, it doesn't have to be a left or right thing. Anyone can do it. Everyone should do it. But when it's just an interesting way to talk about culture and to talk about these things that exist at different levels.
Wonderful. Thank you, Maya. And we'll go to Jack.
As you were talking, I thought, you mentioned the right and left, and I tend to think of the far right and the far left. And I think the analogy I was thinking of is it's like our culture right now is a boat that's really unstable. It's rocking back and forth. And so I think on the left, they don't want to add any more instability to what's going on. So they're holding back. And I think on the right are too constrained by their cultural beliefs, where they think they're walking their line. And I think maybe what you're talking about is people that are closer to the center, but maybe leaning a little bit to the right will be opening up first. And I think on the left, I think people are just holding in because it's just such an unstable time. They don't want to add any more unstableness to the situation. Although the erotic path might say, go ahead and tip it over, go ahead and
Well,
just
yeah, exactly. I love you bringing this up, and I think that it's a fallacy. The adding more erotic power would be the thing that would stabilize, even though it's a wild force. It's the lack. It's like when you starve somebody, they're going to be crazy.
Right.
And
Right.
so neurotically start. So the craziness is actually a result of a starvation that creates the tumescence, as we would call it. It creates that, and that tumescence that's just so strong is what is the instability. Whereas if there was a flood of erotic energy into it, it would actually stabilize it because it would be people who are actually fed, just the same way when you feed a starving person, they are no longer hangry anymore and they can suddenly think and act and behave and everything generously and think about themselves. And it's the same way erotically. And so I think that that's part of the bad math
Right.
that the left does.
Yeah. Yeah. You have a feeling of pulling back, but where you should push into it. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jack. Okay, and then last question, Russell.
Hi. Welcome back. Say a few words about this framing of if you have regret, you get a pass for not holding your sovereignty. Do you have enough to pick that up? Let me try that again. That I could choose to do something, but with volition, and I signed waivers, and I took responsibility for being an adult, and then 10 years later, I made a mistake, and it's like it's a way of letting myself become a victim, or fragile, or abdicate my sovereignty or responsibility to. It's like a get out of free jail card.
Yeah, I think that regret is a really interesting concept and experience that people are grappling with in this whole conversation. There is obviously, in our case, it came up a lot. And then also, there are other cases that I've seen recently. There's this recent, I think that it was a hockey team in Canada that had this huge case that just came up. And this woman, it was, again, 10 years ago, and this woman slept with the whole hockey team in a room. She was a fan and she slept with the whole hockey team that night. And it was this really extreme case. All of these cases seemed like kind of extreme, where there was a video of her that night laughing and being like, haha, why are you taking a video of me? I loved this. I'm so sober. I consented to everything. This was wonderful. You guys are just silly, and there's this whole video of her, and then now 10 years later she says that she regrets it and it was unconsensual, and that the video is actually proof that it was unconsensual. Her consent saying that she consented in the video is proof of lack of consent. So there's so much that is a lot, and I think that there's a lot of parallels in our case as well. And this experience of, yeah, regret and of one changing, um, and how do you, I just don't think, I think we're so ill-equipped to how we deal with regret in our own experiences, where you actually take these experiences and learn from them. And I think that just if it's anything to do in a sexual context, it is the hardest, where we just have no tools, and that the only thing that anyone has is a kind of foisting of the entire experience off of oneself in order to establish a certain identity, reify an identity, have a sense of self that wasn't me. I wouldn't do that. Um, and uh, and I think that until that is integrated and actually integrated into one's experience, and not that you ever have to necessarily even love those experiences, but if you don't integrate them, it'll always be this schism within oneself. And then it's just this interesting thing where it comes up, not just where people have that personally and they don't connect it personally, but then when it goes further into these domains of actual law, and that's where it begins to get really scary of, who is an adult and what does it, how long after a consenting experience can it be taken back, and then what precedent does that set for every experience, and then all of that being a progressive control over all erotic experience, until you have a completely um, neutered culture that can be that where there's no power.
It seems like the actual absence of any practice or time spent in the field of, we'll just call it arousal, makes any sort of transgression cancelable, and there's no room for granularity. It's kind of like you're in, I don't know, Kansas, and you see a Pakistani walking down the street and he's a terrorist. Well, that's, if you're in LA, what happens is he's on the sidewalk and he's walking right towards you, and then he just walks right by you. I mean, because he's going about his business. It's like, there's nothing. I mean, you're making a story out of something that doesn't need that much. It needs compassion, not rejection, or not excommunication.
Yeah, and yeah, and continuous practice on both sides of it, of how, as a woman, do you continue to develop all things that would be needed to have men feel the most well educated on a woman and the most successful, so that with me or with any future woman, that they have a better attunement to them.
I need to amend Pakistani to just be like somebody who doesn't dress the way you dress.
You're canceled.
I mean,
You're canceled,
yeah,
Russell.
I-
Russell, you're canceled.
I'm in the right place. Oh, cool.
Great.
All right, thank you so much, Russell, for that. Okay, before we go to reflections, I want to just let everybody know of a introduction to orgasmic meditation course that is coming up. Maya was talking a lot about like women and sexuality and sovereignty, and for myself, who've been practicing for 20 years, the first step to gaining sovereignty over my own sexuality was through orgasmic meditation and learning the practice. So, for those of you who are tuning in online, if you are interested in learning more about what that class is, we do have a online course coming up August 9th. That is this Saturday. Those on Zoom, I am posting it here in the chat board, and you can go ahead and click on that link to register. For those of you who are online, you can go ahead and click the link that is posted there. It's a free class. All you have to do is come onto the platform, sign up for a free membership, and then take that course this Saturday. So I'll give you guys a minute to go ahead and click on that link. And then we'll now go ahead and go to reflection. So a reflection is a moment, an experience, a thought that you had, something that touched you during the talk that Maya just gave. You can go ahead and raise your virtual hand, and I'll go ahead and bring you online to do a reflection. For those of you online, you can send it in, and I will go ahead and read it. So go ahead and either raise your hand. Those online, go ahead and type it in. And go ahead, Jack.
I was just going to say that it was a good talk because a lot of times I don't frame my daily activities in a Eros flow. But listening to your talk, I don't frame everything that is all my experiences around Eros. So I'm not that steeped in it yet. But because of your talk, I think I'll try to do that more often.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Jack. And then we have one from online from Despite Wisdom. They said, I remember talking to Nicole about Bianca Sensori's red carpet moment, and everyone was commenting how she would later regret it. All I saw was shared confidence. Thank you for the talk, Maya. Okay, and I believe that is all we have. So thank you everybody for joining us today. Please join us tomorrow. Eli Block will be on for the Eros talk, giving us a little bit more on the men in Eros experience. So thank you everybody for joining.